When people talk about the Israel-Palestine conflict, one of the most common misconceptions is that it's been going on for thousands of years, fueled by ancient religious hatreds. But that's not really true. Religion plays a role, yes, but at its heart, this conflict is about land and national identity. And the modern story, it only goes back about a century. For centuries, the area we now call Israel and Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire. It was home to Muslims, Christians, and a smaller number of Jews. And despite religious differences, they generally coexisted. But things began to shift in the early 20th century. On one hand, the Arab population of the region started to form a distinct Palestinian identity. On the other hand, in Europe, many Jews rallied around Zionism, the idea that Jews were not just a religious community, but also a nation that deserved its own homeland. Centuries of persecution in Europe, and later the horrors of the Holocaust, made the dream of a Jewish state feel urgent and necessary. And for many Jews, the ancestral land of the Middle East was the obvious place to build it. So starting in the early 1900s, tens of thousands of Jews immigrated there. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and Britain took control of Palestine under what was called the British Mandate. At first, Britain allowed Jewish immigration, but as more and more Jews arrived and began farming and forming communities, tensions grew with the local Arab population. By the 1930s, violence had broken out between Jews and Arabs. Britain, trying to keep order, began limiting Jewish immigration. But then came the Holocaust, and survivors fleeing Europe poured into Palestine, reigniting conflict. By 1947, violence was spiraling out of control, so the United Nations proposed a solution: split the land into two states, one for Jews, Israel, and one for Arabs, Palestine. Jerusalem, sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims, would become an international city shared by all. Jewish leaders accepted the plan and declared independence as Israel in 1948. But Arab leaders rejected it, seeing it as another colonial land grab by Europeans. That same year, neighboring Arab countries invaded Israel in an effort to prevent its creation. Israel survived the war and actually expanded beyond the borders the UN had drawn. But this came at a massive human cost. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were expelled or fled their homes. Many of their descendants, now numbering around 7 million, are still refugees today. At the war's end, Israel controlled most of the land. Egypt held Gaza, and Jordan controlled the West Bank. This was the beginning of what became known as the Arab-Israeli conflict. For the next 2 decades, tension simmered. Then, in 1967, Israel fought another war against its neighbors. In just 6 days, Israel seized the West Bank from Jordan, Gaza and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and the Golan Heights from Syria. This was a turning point. Israel now occupied all of the Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem and its holy sites. Suddenly, Israel was ruling over millions of Palestinians who did not want to be under its control. In 1978, something historic happened. Israel and Egypt signed the Camp David Accords, brokered by the United States. Israel returned the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, and in exchange, Egypt recognized Israel. This was controversial in the Arab world, and Egypt's president, Anwar Sadat, was assassinated for it. But it marked the beginning of Arab states, gradually moving away from direct war with Israel. From this point on, the conflict became less about Israel versus all Arab countries, and more about Israel versus the Palestinians. Let's jump to the 1960s, when the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, was formed to reclaim all of historical Palestine, effectively to end Israel. The PLO became the main voice for Palestinians displaced in 1948, uniting various factions under one goal. But in 1967, Israel's victory in the Six-Day War changed everything. Israel captured the West Bank, Gaza, and more, suddenly ruling over a large Palestinian population. Israeli settlements began popping up in these occupied territories, seen by Israelis as security and heritage, but by Palestinians as illegal land grabs. The settlements made a future Palestinian state harder to imagine. Over time, the PLO's stance shifted. By the 1980s, Arafat and the PLO signaled willingness for a two-state solution, an independent Palestine alongside Israel. This was a huge change, but as diplomacy inched forward, settlements kept expanding, creating facts on the ground that complicated any peace deal. The stage was set for decades of struggle over land, identity, and the possibility of coexistence. The conflict's landscape was now defined by occupation, resistance, and growing obstacles to peace. The next chapter would see new players and even deeper divisions. By 1987, after 20 years of occupation, Palestinian frustration erupted in the First Intifada, protests, strikes, and clashes. The world saw images of stone-throwing youth facing Israeli soldiers, shifting global perceptions. Israel's harsh response drew international criticism, while the uprising exposed the limits of the PLO's leadership. Amid the chaos, Hamas emerged, an Islamist group rejecting compromise, calling for Israel's destruction and building support through social services. Now the Palestinian movement was split. The PLO edged toward negotiation, while Hamas pushed for armed resistance. This division would haunt every future peace effort. The Intifada left over 1,000 Palestinians and more than 100 Israelis dead and fundamentally changed the conflict. The world's attention was now fixed on the urgent need for a political solution. But unity among Palestinians was shattered, complicating any path forward. The First Intifada forced both sides to the table, leading to secret talks in Oslo. In 1993, the world watched as Rabin and Arafat shook hands on the White House lawn, signing the Oslo Accords. The deal created the Palestinian Authority and promised gradual Israeli withdrawal from parts of the West Bank and Gaza. It was a moment of hope, two peoples recognizing each other, short. Israeli communities optimistic, short. Hopeful scenes in Palestinian communities, short. Nobel Peace Prize ceremony. But extremists on both sides struck back. Hamas launched suicide bombings. Israeli right-wing opposition grew. In 1995, Rabin was assassinated by an Israeli extremist, a devastating blow to the peace process. Rabin's funeral. The Oslo dream began to unravel as violence and mistrust returned. Jerusalem refugees, borders, settlements. The promise of peace faded, replaced by renewed fear and suspicion. The conflict was far from over. After Rabin's death, peace talks stalled, settlements kept growing, fueling Palestinian anger. In 2000, Ariel Sharon's visit to Jerusalem's Temple Mount sparked the Second Intifada, a far bloodier, more militarized uprising. Suicide bombings, gun battles devastated both societies. Over 1,000 Israelis died, 3,000 Palestinians died. Israel reoccupied Palestinian areas, imposed harsh restrictions, and built a massive barrier in the West Bank. The violence destroyed trust and hope for a two-state solution. Both sides retreated into fear and blame, and the Oslo process collapsed. The Second Intifada left a legacy of trauma and hardened divisions. The dream of peace was replaced by deep-seated bitterness. The conflict now seemed more intractable than ever. In 2005, Israel withdrew from Gaza, but the move led to internal Palestinian conflict. Hamas seized control of Gaza in 2007, splitting Palestinian leadership, triggering an Israeli-Egyptian blockade. Gaza became isolated, impoverished, repeatedly ravaged by war. In the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority governs limited areas. Israeli settlements keep expanding. The two-state solution looks increasingly out of reach. Israelis face ongoing security threats and political divisions. Palestinians endure occupation, blockade, deepening despair. Today, the conflict remains unresolved, a struggle over land, identity, and the hope for a better future.